Hey guys, and welcome to JaysAndKays. What I have here today is, it's not a watch. It's actually a collection of straps here. And the purpose of this video is to talk about the difference between NATO straps and ZULU straps. And this is because I get a lot of communication from folks and they're asking for a NATO strap. And as we talk, it turns out what they're really looking for is a ZULU style strap. And so in order to clarify the difference, we need to spend a little bit of time talking about the history and also some trademarks that are in play, because that has led to some of the ambiguity. With some misnomers out there when guys are referring to Zulus and they're using the term NATO. I'll tell you why some of that happens. But anyway, I've got an example of a NATO here in my hand. I'll just kind of move it around so you can look at it while I'm yapping. But this goes back to, I think, like 72, 73 with the British Ministry of Defense. They came out with a strap design for their folks, and it was to be a woven strap or woven nylon strap with specific requirements about the metal and this top piece and a bottom piece with a keeper loop. Since then, there's been some revisions to that design, the specification. I'll put a link to the current specification in the comments here, and you guys can have a look at that yourself. But anyway, the term NATO comes from, well, there were some terms that were derived from what these guys had to do to order these, the NATO stock number, and also G10. So this is more commonly known as a G10, or had been for some time. And that had to do, my understanding is, because the requisition form they had to fill out, the number of the form was G10 something and something. So they just simplified their reference and called this the G10. But that's how it was related to the terminology that was done. So you can see the construction of this. And these are typically about 1.2 to 1.3 millimeter thick. And you might have some that are called premium NATOs that's a slightly tighter weave, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But let's talk about how this works, because that's probably the best way to get going here. So I need a watch to put this on, and I've actually got one here. It's probably not your typical one. It's a Sunto core of mine that I've got my fixed lugs on, so that they'll be representing an actual fixed lug watch. And so I just want to pop those off. And by the way, that's one of my composite rubber straps with a pre-V buckle that I use on the core. So if you're interested in that, hit me up. We'll get you hooked up. So let me drop these spring bars in here. So here's a typical watch with spring bars on it, let's just say, for the sake of what we're going to demonstrate. And here's a 24 millimeter NATO style strap. Now, the original NATO spec, I understand, was for a 20 millimeter strap, and it's probably been enhanced to include 18 millimeter, but there were some specific specifications on the width, and this is a 24. So there's a little bit of difference if you're a purist to what I'm referring to now. But this is how the NATO works. So we're going to pass the main piece under the watch through the spring bars, and then we're going to pass that main piece through the second shorter end's keeper on the end. So there's an advantage in this. Right now I can put this around my wrist, cinch it down, and it's going to be on my wrist nice and tight. And there's a reliability component to this design. If one of my spring bars were to fail, I'd still have the watch captured on the other end. So on a normal two-piece strap scenario, the continuity of that strap around your wrist is including your watch. So your watch establishes that continuity. So if one of your spring bars were to fail on a normal two-piece watch strap, guess what? You're losing your watch and your strap. In this case, you may lose the spring bar, but your watch is still going to be flopping around on your wrist because it's captured by one end, and the strap continuity still exists. So your strap is still on your wrist regardless. So that's a very reliable improvement. And it's a great design. It's the reason it's very popular. But let's talk about the difference now. So that's talking about the NATO. Let's talk about ZULU. Now, NATO, most of us recognize that as something of a generic design. But where things get confusing is that there is a company called International Watchman. And a few years back, they actually trademarked NATO and NATO G10. And as soon as they got those trademarks, they went out and sued a number of companies for infringement. Now, many of us might find offense to that because, well, when they registered NATO, they registered under the guise of first commercial use. And that really wasn't the case, because obviously NATO straps had been around for decades before. But when they sued these companies, and these are companies like your Panatime, your Crown and Buckle, your NATO strap company, and so forth, they sued them for infringement. And then there was a countersuit. Those companies fought back to try to demonstrate the generic nature of the name. Unfortunately, they didn't win. There's been some agreements. In fact, if you go to these sites for these other companies, you'll find that they're still able to sell NATO straps. I think it's under specific licensing agreements because you'll find that they do say in their websites that NATO is a registered trademark of International Watchman. Anyway, with that being said, let's move on to ZULU. So ZULU is a registered trademark of Maritac. And so that's why a lot of times I refer to these as ZULU style, because this isn't a strap that came from Maritac, but it embodies all the design concepts of that ZULU strap. It's a much thicker material. Instead of the 1.2, 1.3 of the NATO, this is about 1.5, 1.6 millimeter thick. The hardware is certainly more robust, as you can see. Instead of these smaller, skinnier rings, you've got these large diameter oval rings here. Anyway, it's a pretty robust sort of strap. A lot of guys love it, but there's some people who don't like this heavy, robust feeling of this, and they prefer the lighter feeling of the NATO. Okay, so where does the confusion lie? Well, since ZULU is a registered trademark of Maritac, there's a lot of companies who will be apprehensive to call their ZULU style straps ZULU straps. Obviously, that's infringement. So what they call them is HD NATO, and that's where a lot of the confusion lies. So you'll have a standard NATO, which follows the specs, maybe the original specs from MOD, and you might have a premium NATO, which is a tighter weave. And then what folks will do is they'll take this ZULU style and they'll call it an HD NATO. So if that doesn't muddy the waters, what does, right? Anyway, so on top of that, we have what could be called a 5-ring ZULU. And we'll refer to this as a 3-ring. There's some purists who might refer to the number of rings minus the buckle ring, so they could call this a 2 or a 4. I don't think a lot of people do that anymore. I think most people refer to this as like a 5 and a 3. But let's talk about the ZULU. So a one-piece ZULU certainly is awesome if you were to use it on a regular watch with the spring bars like this. And this is a 22 millimeter, by the way. So I'm just going to pass it through this 24 millimeter lug for the purpose of demonstration. If you were to pass it through there, you still have the added reliability. If one spring bar were to pop, then you'd still have the watch captured. But if you were to cinch this down on your wrist really tight, you are exposing these spring bars to a little bit of strain. Whatever strain you put on how tight you make the strap on your wrist, the spring bars will endure that as well. So some people may not want that strain on those spring bars. That could cause them to be more susceptible to failure. So here's where the advantage of a 5-ring comes into play. And let me show you that. So a lot of guys, well, not a lot, but I do get some inquiries from guys who say, hey, I bought this strap from you and it's so long. Why do you make it so long? And I find out the way they're wearing it is they pass it straight through this pair of rings on the end, and they're not using these rings correctly. And let me show you what correctly means. So let's pass this watch through my core here. Let's go ahead and bring it on through. And the goal here is to leave this top strap without strain. So we're going to actually bring this strap through here, through our pair of rings. And here's where some guys are unfamiliar with the design concept. So I've got it staged here. You see the top strap, how it's looping. This bottom strap portion has our keepers on the end, and that's where we take our strap in, and we're going to weave it through these 2 rings like so. And this is a little bit exaggerated for the purpose of what you want to see here. But now I would put this around my wrist and I'd tighten it down, cinch this down nice and tight, and I can make this as tight as possible. But as long as I've weaved this through here with the correct distances, this top strap is going to be isolated from that tension down here. And so my spring bars aren't going to feel that tension. And so we've got an advantage over the NATO in that we still have the independent capture point. So if one spring bar were to pop, the other one would still be true. But the other advantage, I think, in my opinion, is that I've removed the strain off the spring bars as well. That strain that would be present on a NATO, although not as bad as it is on, say, a one-piece ZULU. So that's how you would run a 5-ring ZULU. And I hope that also answers some questions for you guys. So there's a quick summary of all this. If you guys have any questions, shoot me a message down below. And otherwise, have a great day. Bye.